In the previous video, it was quite deliberate that I discussed the example of when people visit Krakow. They like to, many like to then take a further trip to Auschwitz, Birkenau, and for obvious reasons. And but I also stated that people should think about maybe visiting the Schindler factory, because you've got a nice contrast there. You've got one dreadful institution where, in difficult circumstances, I know people would have gone along with horrendous atrocities. And you've got another example where somebody could have taken the easy option and gone along with what he was asked to do as part of this awful operation. But he tried to find a workaround, a solution as to how he could save some lives. So he didn't take the easy option. And when we've come up against corrupt and degenerate institutions, which are almost everywhere we look now in the West, particularly in the United Kingdom, but it's certainly not exclusive to here. You need to find the Schindlers, the people who can see the evil that's within and try to do something about it, that those who won't take the easy options. It's similar sort of frustrations I had at WealthTech. And I've got actually another book that I'll eventually be publishing that'll bring together all this coordinated coercion that I've discussed in these videos that led to this police state terror. But that's into the future. So you need to find the Schindlers in these institutions that will recognise the evil and will try to discreetly help. And that's what we've fortunately been able to do across multi institutions, which is, I think they are aware of this now, which is why they engaged in this police state terror. Using a pretext of vandalism, time machine assisted vandalism, and they front it with harassment. Harassment's a very common tactic of theirs, what they do when someone's drilling for accountability and identifying corruption. They'll try to respond with harassment and then lead on the police state terror. Exactly what they've done with me. Remember, in my particular instance, I'm accused of being investigated for harassing Rachel Hudson, a family court judge who, in our case and others too, unfortunately, has accepted falsified evidence, knowingly done so, and that's facilitated the trading of children through social services into the hands of private equity-owned institutions, the commodification and trading of children, and that is a common tactic when you try to get into these institutions. They use that as the front, of course. Now, strangely enough, this harassment, after I refused the bail conditions, and then all of a sudden they disappeared. So you're being investigated for harassing someone you're completely at liberty to contact and approach. So that tells you all you need to know. On this matter, I did mention on the previous interview that I'd received correspondence from Northumbria Police that my complaint is being investigated by somebody else who's going to take some time and do this, that, and the other, and cobble together some sort of a response, which we look forward to taking apart word by word. And I pasted in the description that, and I pasted in my response to it. My response to it, you already know that many of these features, so I won't go into them in too great a detail, because you can read them yourself, and I've discussed them at length in previous videos. Now, one thing that they have run into issues too with at Northumbria Police, which is partly why they've done this. Remember, I previously told you the way that Kate Ingalls had been told to set up and manage the complaint. We were ready for that. We'd already been well briefed on it, which is, again, another reason why it's been handed over. But there is a further reason on top of that, is when they've started to interview the officers who were engaged in the police state terror of searching this house under the pretext of looking for spray paint for this time machine assisted vandalism they accused me of. They were really just doing it as a front to take the devices, and the officers weren't properly informed themselves, and there's been a little bit of tension at Northumbria Police because they feel like they've been set up themselves, which is why they're having to go back and think, how can we deal with this? We're ready for them. We look forward to being able to expose further lies and corruption. But on the point on Vanessa Jardine that I put in my response, we will be needing to talk to Vanessa in due course, depending on how they want to take this. And it's quite interesting with her because, as you'd imagine, we were very keen to look into what her role was in this sort of Pink Panther policing stroke police state terror that I suffered. Whether you use it as a pretext to take away our devices. Remember, I've been experiencing coordinated coercion from the FCA, South Tyneside Council, on this sort of dual track investigation. We've been looking at the flaws of the regulator prosecutor model and how it fails the victims of financial scandal, and also how this deplorable and quite satanic trade in children that leads right into the financial sector. And I warned the FCA as far back as 2023 that these are serious issues that we were looking at, and they risked undermining the integrity of the financial industry. And so there is some tension there with what Jardine's done, because essentially what's happened, I'll go into it in further detail, but Rachel Hudson, who we knew they would try to come through, and they gave the game away in my interview, which I've alluded to in my response. She's effectively trying to call in a favour because she's worried, because she's aware that we've drilled into the financial ecosystem. We've looked at, and it isn't actually just about her, actually. And this is the one thing that they need to understand. It's not about a social worker. It's not about a family court judge. It's about a corrupted system. There are many, many others, which we will come to in due course. We only judge people by their actions. We never look out and say, this is a person we'll go and try to terrorise them or harass them. There's no merit in that. What's the point? No point at all. But we judge people by their own human agency. And each of these individuals have had the opportunity, if they believe they were being asked to do something wrong, something immoral, they could have blown the whistle. They could have done something, spoken out, but they've chosen to go along with it. So you have to judge them on that merit. But also with Jardine, so we're very interested in the mechanics of how this warrant was requested and how that was processed at Northumbria Police. But we were, as you'd expect, we also wanted to look at Jardine's past and her previous roles at other constabularies, if you like, forces. And we started to do that, and we came across another team who were well along with looking at her role in the context of something else which will be hitting the news in the not too distant future. So we kind of had a quick chat with them, gave them a few pointers of what they might want to look at, and broadly left them alone because they seem to be quite a long way down the path of their work and doing quite a good job. So that's going to be interesting. So that's the point I made with Jardine. But to give you an update of the degeneracy of the system, and arguably this is when you get these degenerate institutions. So now I'm flicking to social services of South Tyneside. They believe in their own unaccountability. Quite similar to the FCA in many ways, although I wouldn't prescribe to the FCA anything like the degeneracy that I see in this wicked trade in children. They believe that they are untouchable, that they can operate outside the parameters of the law, and social workers will do that. They're chosen very carefully, and there's a very big turnover of staff, which is exceptionally good for people like us. And they develop this hubris, and they believe that they can do what they want, and they're untouchable. And you've got very, very limited intelligent people in terms of intelligence that are given power that's way beyond what they normally should have. And it creates this hubris. And that's how you beat them. Because essentially, metaphorically here, you strangle them with their own hubris, which is exactly what we're doing. You just collate the evidence, you distribute the evidence, and you just envelope them and effectively suffocate them with their own arrogance. Again, I'm using metaphors here. It's not a call for violence. And in case scenario, again, in the previous video, I gave an example of what they did. We were away in Poland, and they had one of their care team meetings. And this is a deeply satanic and wicked organisation. So, because we've stood up for our daughter's heritage, the heritage is an impediment for this sort of frictionless trade. They just want to commodify the child and push the child through a trading system where the child will be then accommodated with a private equity owned or a private owned agency. And they just want to then milk the child for as long as they can in terms of cash flows. So because we stood up for a heritage, we started to show how they've engaged in mass, the country and including them are engaged in mass psychological abuse of children to try to make them fit this model. They've become very aggressive. So what they do is to hide their own corruption. They put further abuse on the child. And they also try to bully us as well. So what they did is they sent out this, and it really is hard to believe, they sent out this invitation to join this meeting. I'd previously been banned from the meeting because I'd called out Deirdre Ryan of South Tyneside Council because she'd been threatening me in a coordinated fashion. She'd made references to wealth tech, made references to this, and said if I continued with these investigations, they would stop us from seeing our daughter. That she was a little bit wary of fully doing that. Goodness knows if they go and get a judge who tries to do it, life will be very difficult for that judge in terms of accountability, I can assure you. But particularly having exposed Rachel Hudson's conduct. So what they did, they sent out this invitation. My wife went to join. As I said, I've been banned because I called out this coordinated coercion on a recorded call. One of the reasons why Northumbria Police wanted our devices. And there's no one there. So they use some excuse that they never turned up for a call. And what they've done is they then said the meetings now have to be at some filthy contact centre called the Poppy Field in sort of Bolton area of South Tyneside, because they can then surveil everything. We can't give our daughter any cards, we can't give her any letters without it being surveilled, because they're terrified, because they know that we've been on the inside, we are on the inside periodically, and we know what they've done. And we make repeated complaints to Northumbria Police. They should already be under investigation for racism, corruption, falsification of evidence, whatever the list goes on and on and on. But Northumbria Police can't do that because they're an instrument of the same coordinated coercion. The significance of taking it also to this centre is they know that we feel deeply traumatised and visiting the centre back in February 2022. My wife and a Polish interpreter and younger daughter were grossly racially abused by an employee of that contact centre. They were shouted at and intimidated against using Polish language. It was one of the worst acts of racism I've seen in this country. Made me deeply, deeply ashamed. So what they're trying to do is to evoke further trauma and cruelty, because you're standing up to them. That is the depravity and the satanic nature of this operation. So, and Deirdre Ryan, again, we're judging her by her actions. It's nothing to do with her as an individual. We know what the language they try to use. We're on the inside. So what she tried to say is, our daughter wanted the meetings there. That's a common thing they do. They lie. I mean, we could put Deirdre's lies, recorded lies, on a toilet roll and struggle. It's again, I come back to this hubris. And we asked our daughter at this meeting, and she said, never said anything like that. Never said anything like that. Remember the falsification of evidence and things like that. These are things you can find everywhere. They're not just us. You look at groups on Facebook, look at everywhere. It's not sour grapes. These are institutionalized corruption, satanic corruption. And she said, no one asked. And we asked her, where are you going to live in the future? I'm not allowed to know. All this is recorded. I'm not allowed to know. She suffers. She's got a ripped blazer. She doesn't know who to ask properly for a school equipment. She had to choose her options herself. We weren't allowed to be any involved in that. There was no input from the social worker. Just left, abandoned, somewhere on the outside of Durham. Nobody. She hasn't got a female she can approach to about any issues. This is a deeply, deeply, deeply satanic organisation in this trade. I mean, if you want some idea of how it works, and I have alluded to this in other videos. There was an organisation that were tagged in for foster carers on Indeed. I often look on platforms like that to drill down in what these organisations are and how it's exactly what tends to happen. Is somebody sets up an agency as a private company, and they take account of essentially the smaller companies exemption, which essentially means you can produce sets of accounts which are so basic and out of date they are meaningless. And they go through that process, so you can't see anything about an organisation. You can broadly deduce a few things about cash flow, but there's no income statement, no cash flow statements. There's just two balance sheets, very simplistic and very out of date when they're published. And then they bulk up and up and up and up and up to when they become a nice sort of scale for a private equity consolidator to buy them and bolt them up against in a bigger consolidation vehicle, which will also then that will sit in an offshore fund, and there'll be institutional investors in that fund, and that will include pension funds, endowments, and so on and so forth. And the private equity organisation will maintain some ownership itself, and the rest it will farm out to its investors, and they'll take a management fee on those. And that's the process it does. And actually, this smaller companies exemption via Companies House is actually one of the reasons why Britain's the major money laundering centre in the West, because it is so easy to set up a smaller company, and the accounting requirements are so basic. You can hide almost anything. The accounts are works of fiction. They're so simplified basics. They are absolutely works of fiction. And actually, this again, I'm making a passing comment here. Not. I'm talking generally here, but in terms of the Wealth Tech case, this very structure will have some relevance. And if you look at where I'm talking generally here, not specific to the Welltec allegations, where there's money laundering, this structure plays a major part in it. And it's one of the reasons why Britain is so vulnerable to money laundering. Remember, in Lost the Races, I did make the point that in Britain, money laundering is a technical term with a political interpretation. So you go through this charade where you harass people who are engaged in everyday transactions, but the real money laundering goes on unabated because the system is just so slack. But in terms of this degeneracy, again, it's worth noting that the FCA in the weeks before I suffered this raid, I was complaining to them about this. I said this coordinator coercion had enough. I'm going to turn on it, which I have done. That's why they raided the property. And I sort of reminded them, that this conflict of interest between them being a regulator and a prosecutor is not by accident. It's the baked-in obfuscation, which means that you can't properly ever hold them accountable. And if you look at Welltec, there is no way that the client should have ever suffered any losses. The risk of recovery should be with the Treasury, because the range of failures are just catastrophic. I've identified them on these videos and on in the book as well. I mean, if you consider it, when I made the whistleblowing disclosures, that they could have just looked at John's profile and the media around him, and they would say, "Oh, there's a horse racing here. They've got a regulator, haven't they? A VHA. So maybe we should talk to them and say, have you got any concerns about said individual and conduct and so on and so forth?" And had they have done that, they would be, well, back in 2016, there was this time when there was a sort of complaint put through, or concern put through, about the processing of funds that were placed into an escrow account, and that alone would have reinforced what I was saying, the risk and what I was saying, and that was never done. These are the most basic rudimentary aspects of which you can do. And again, another relevant point is when I was in these exchanges, the FCA, I said, because of what's happened at Welltec, we became very, very interested in Woodford because we recognised the same narrative, and the narrative was leading us to the same points. And I said to Middleditch and his cronies that you should go and look at the legal advice that you received about Link and the Woodford case, because essentially the FCA had full transparency on Woodford. Woodford was very transparent on what he was doing up until the difficulties, and they had to pull some of the transparency on the fund for obvious reasons. You're liquidating it, liquidating some of the positions, and the fund was then suspended. The fund was then eventually put into closure, and the FCA had full visibility of that whole process and watched it go to the worst case scenario for the Woodford clients. So essentially what the FCA tried to do is they needed to engineer a failure into a success. So then they came up with a scheme of arrangement and said, look, this is the best that clients can expect. And fortunately, clients were left very, very disappointed, as various media articles have alluded to. And what should happen? Because essentially they were told you wouldn't really have a case against Link, because Link would turn around and say, well, any time you could have stepped in if you were worried about that consumers were at risk, and you didn't. So there's no way they could have won that. And I said to them, you should really. Well, my message to them is you should publish this device. You should publish this legal advice, because ultimately clients have paid for it. You don't have any money. You collect money from regulated businesses who pay that fee via the money they earn from their clients. So clients fund the FCA, and they should be honest with the clients and say, this is what we had to do because we essentially failed. So we had to salvage something for you. And they haven't. And it's no accident that this obfuscation is baked into this model. And this is when you hear people like David Starkey talking and things like that, is the whole sort of Blair project was about creating these entities that you could never lay a glove on in terms of accountability because they sat outside of Parliament and they could always obfuscate and find an excuse, prejudice, ongoing this, ongoing that, where you can never actually hold them to account. And that's the issue. And really, your regulator should be brought within the Treasury and be a direct line of accountability. And your prosecuting side of it should be completely free from from the rest of it, your regulator and your supervisor. Because allowing it to model like that is just baked in obfuscation, and you'll never really be able to get to grips because the cases will take so long. The end of the case, they'll say, "Oh, there was a few issues, but we've fixed it. We're transformed now." And meanwhile, if there's another scandal, they'll say, "Can't talk about it, prejudice." So you can see it's a big con. But again, I'll leave you with another point about degeneracy. If you think about it at the moment, albeit he's fairly politically impotent, but he's still the Prime Minister, Starmer. So we have a Prime Minister, and I really hope this doesn't happen. I'm very concerned about some of the provocations that are taking place in the Ukraine to try to escalate this war, but I really hope it doesn't happen. But let's say that we were in a situation where there was a state of war and your Prime Minister would be in a position where he could declare war and send British service personnel into battle, conflict. Now you've got the very same person who formerly persecuted British personnel who were sent into conflict in places like Iran. And the person the Iran war was appalling. But it was appalling because those who initiated it and sent the British personnel to war did so on the basis of falsities and lies. It wasn't the service people that you should blame, but that person was Blair. And now we have Blair lecturing us on how we should be governed, writing long speeches and articles and so on. But Starmer and Hermer, his chief legal advisor, they go after the vulnerable, the easy targets. They don't go after the people that put them into that difficult position. That's how this degeneracy is embedded in society. Can you fix it? I don't know. It's gone so far, I really don't know. But if you look at Athens, if you look at Rome, the fall of it was all linked to degeneracy, the degeneracy of the institutions that supported those societies. And as more and more people start to see it and challenge it, societies become more and more aggressive and more authoritarian, because really the only thing they've got left at that point is state terror. But ironically, that speeds up their demise, and that's what history tells you. And I think that's where we're heading. Don't quite know how it will end, but I don't think it's going to end with Andy Burnham or even reform, because I think the problems are so fundamental they need much bigger solutions than that. That's enough for now. Take care. Bye.